So last week, I mentioned how Disney had a pretty great track record when it came to putting out quality games based on their IPs. But like I said, they were the exception, not the rule. Most other companies are basically willing to just slap their name on anything in hopes for some quick cash from uninformed consumers. And those consumers are more often than not uninformed parents who see the title of a show that their kids watch on a video game box and just assume they will like it. Essentially, none of these companies needed to try. And try they didn't. Even now, they don't care. One of the many networks that tried to break into the video game market was Nickelodeon, and boy, did they make some grade A garbage. But you know what they say, a broken clock is still right twice a day, and occasionally they did manage to put their name on something of quality. So today, let's look at some Nickelodeon games which actually do seem to stand up in their own right, and then compare them to the other side of the licensed game spectrum, the parallel scenario. If you utter the words good Nickelodeon game to anyone, 9 times out of 10, the first thing that's gonna pop into their head is SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. I realize me talking about this game is nothing groundbreaking because at this point, most people have heard about it, but for me, I never actually played the game myself. I picked it up years ago for the original Xbox, but I think I can count the amount of original Xbox titles I've played on one hand, despite owning quite a few of them. Well, there's never been a more fitting time in my life to finally sit down and try this game out for myself, and you know, everyone's always talking about how good it is. It's got this huge cult following of people shouting its praises, but you want to know what I think? It's pretty good. So I do have to say, this is my first time actually playing an original Xbox game on my 360, and on a 4K TV, I didn't think it was gonna look all that great, but I was actually pretty shocked at how crisp the game looked. Yeah, the Xbox was definitely ahead of its time, but I digress. So for those of you who are somehow at this point still uninformed, SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom is a collectathon platformer that was released for the original Xbox, GameCube, and PS2. There were versions for PC and GBA, but those were done by different studios and aren't ports. They're more so their own games. Now, I always heard this game was a collectathon platformer akin to something like Banjo-Kazooie, but whenever claims like that are made, I'm a bit weary considering that despite the term being used to describe a whole genre, there really weren't all that many games that even fit the criteria. If we're being real here, the term collectathon is basically used to describe a list of like 5 games. Anyway, despite some of the levels being more so linear paths than they are an open sandbox, I can say this game is a perfectly competent 3D collectathon platformer. It doesn't break any ground, it's not gonna blow your fucking mind, but it's a fun game that's engaging and controls well enough. I will say though, one thing that's super off-putting is the juxtaposition between the original and game-only voice actors. Obviously, you can't expect every single actor from the show to reprise their role, but some of them are super far off.
No money means no more Krusty Krab. No more Krusty Krab means no more fry cooking for you.
That ain't Mr. Krabs. So I'm not gonna get super in-depth here, but basically, SpongeBob and Patrick are playing with their toy robots, but then Patrick hatches this brilliant idea to wish for their toys to turn into real robots. They go to bed, and then in the morning, SpongeBob wakes up to see that shit hit the fan and their robots somehow did come to life and proceeded to paint the town red. So now it's up to SpongeBob and friends to collect shiny objects and golden spatulas to defeat the robots. In Banjo terms, shiny objects are notes and spatulas are jiggies. Everything is set up like your typical collectathon. There's areas that serve as hubs with doors or paths leading to single levels. As the game progresses, you get to play as other characters whose abilities alter your moveset and allow for new platforming or combat options. Kinda like the Kongs from DK64, only far less tedious and cumbersome. Honestly, this game isn't what I'd call amazing, but it's pretty good and just goes to show that when a developer actually tries, they can make something that's actually not a steaming pile of crap. Speaking of steaming pile of crap, SpongeBob Hero Pants for the Xbox 360. Here's an example of a developer taking an IP and not having a care in the world about making a decent video game. What confuses me about this one is that prior to actually getting into the gameplay, the menus and everything actually look decent. Even when selecting your character, they kind of gave it an arcade feel, like something like Turtles in Time, and it even has co-op, just like an arcade-style beat-em-up. But arcade-style beat-em-up, this game is not. This is a badly programmed, bland, unoptimized, poorly designed, sorry excuse for a linear 3D platformer. Where do I even begin? First off, I'd like to say that this game chugs. It chugs bad. This game drops more frames than Sonic Boom, and I've got to say that's quite the accomplishment. Like, for example, whenever something happens in the game, and by something I mean anything from the main power-up transformation the game's title is based off of to something as unimportant as a text box, this game will just hang on a single frame for sometimes, I swear, up to a second or two. It's that bad. And sometimes the game just straight up crashes and I have to hard reboot my 360. How does something like that even happen? It's not like they didn't know the game was like this. These aren't isolated incidents. They're extremely common. common. The sound design is also complete trash. The soundtrack is super repetitive and not in the way that something like, say, the Legend of Zelda overworld theme is. See, something like that is so pleasing to the ears and catchy and invokes a feeling of bravery and strength. This, however, makes me want to shove a pencil into my ear canal.
Everybody, primal scream! Ready?
The background music, though, isn't half as bad as the sound effects, which are just straight up offensive. They're loud, dissonant, harsh on the ears, and played way too often. For example, this is how it sounds when you pick up the game's main collectible. Not to mention, each character has a list of like 3 phrases that they incessantly repeat over and over roughly every 16 seconds.
No, I'm too young to stay.
The sound design in this game is quite honestly jarring to listen to. Actually, there's this one enemy that when I heard it, it honestly triggered my brain to think it was my car alarm going off. Also, the boss patterns are super difficult. So the game's main mechanic is this superhero mode, which basically doesn't do much else apart from boosting your speed and jump height. It only lasts for a few seconds, but those few seconds are pure bliss as they make the game at least twice as bearable. But that's not really saying much. Out of everything in the game, though, nothing is quite as infuriating as what I'm about to explain. So basically, unless playing in co-op mode with 3 other people, you're essentially gated out of completion. A certain number of the collectible items are only obtainable with specific characters, and not even because different characters have different abilities, but simply because they lock them behind literal doors that only specific characters can pass. Now, you would think that this would just be added tediousness, having to go back through stages you've already beaten with a different character, but no, many doors can only be passed with a combination of 2 or more specific characters, so there's no way to complete the game by yourself unless you sit there periodically moving multiple characters through each stage with multiple controllers. Nothing about this is good design. One might say this game is bold and brash. So I never got into the Avatar series as a kid, so up until like a year ago, I didn't even know what the Legend of Korra even was, but I learned recently that Platinum Games, the company responsible for the Bayonetta series, made a hack and slash game based on the Korra IP. Now, apparently this game wasn't very well received, and as of recently has been removed from all the digital stores that sold it. This game was never released physically, so unfortunately, unless you already purchased it or, can figure out some other means to get the PC port, the game can't even be enjoyed. And that's pretty upsetting to me because honestly, despite all the negative reviews it got, in my opinion, this is a perfectly fun little hack and slash game. It's not long, apparently only like 4 hours for the main story, and compared to something like Bayonetta or Metal Gear Rising, its mechanics and battle system is super simple and limited, but I find it to be actually pretty fun. Sure, it's not as polished and fleshed out as a AAA game, but what's here is definitely of quality. This game is by no means bad, and it's a shame that it can't be easily enjoyed now. At the start of the game, Korra loses all of her abilities, and the game then has you traversing through the different stages fighting off enemies and bosses. In each stage, you unlock one of the 4 bending arts to add to your arsenal. Sitting in between the main stages are short little temple run types of levels where you ride Naga through the streets avoiding hazards. I normally dislike this kind of switch up in gameplay, but the levels are short, not difficult, and unobtrusive. I'm also a really big fan of the cell shading in this game. It really makes everything pop without deviating from the art style of the show. I know this game got a lot of negative backlash, but really I just don't see it. I think if you're a fan of hack and slash games like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry and you just want a short little game to play, you'll have a decent time with this one. And if you're a fan of the series, you'll probably like it even more. Just don't go into it expecting a $60 AAA title because that's not what this is. The game is short and simple, but short and simple doesn't automatically equate to bad. Go play it if you can manage to figure out how. What could possibly be better than a live-action movie based on the Avatar: The Last Airbender series directed by M. Night Shyamalan that has a Metacritic score of 20? A video game based on a movie based on the Avatar: The Last Airbender series directed by M. Night Shyamalan for an underpowered console with motion controls. I am quite frankly upset that I even had to track this down and purchase this with money. I don't know who made the executive decision to have this game be created, but I cannot see a scenario in which this was a lucrative move for anyone. I want to start off by saying this game looks like dog shit. All of the colors are dull and dark, and everything just looks like a muddy mess. So this game is similar in some ways to the last game, but yet completely different in other ways. It's not quite a hack and slash, though it does share some similar combat elements. But imagine this, a hack and slash style combat system where you can't dodge or do anything to evade or counter. Sounds like a bad idea, right? Well, that didn't stop THQ Australia when they developed this game. There is seemingly no way to dodge any incoming attacks, and every time you get hit, you fall down. It takes 27 years to get back up. There's no invincibility frames once you do get back on your feet, though, so unless you quickly jump out of the way as soon as you get up, there's a pretty good chance you're getting knocked right back on your ass. So the game has you traversing linear levels as Zuko, Ong, and the Blue Spirit. Now, all the levels are basically the same situation. Running from corridor to corridor, room to room, fighting waves of enemies, and occasionally having to solve puzzles to open doors. But to be fair, the puzzles themselves are usually nothing more than placing a block on a switch. One exception to this rule is the occasional boss fight, and also, for some reason, these totally out-of-left-field arcade-style shooter segments that are literally just Time Crisis.
It's just like the movie!
Playing as Zuko and the Blue Spirit are both pretty similar, but Ong can use airbending to move shit around, usually to solve puzzles. Also, combat is slightly more bearable thanks to his staff. Speaking of combat, it pretty much just consists of button mashing until the game decides to throw a prompt up on the screen telling you to swing the Wii Remote in a corresponding direction. I'm not sure how this was supposed to improve gameplay in any way. Also, the game for whatever reason decided to use the B button instead of the A button to jump, which on the Wii Remote is completely unintuitive. It's basically the equivalent of using a trigger to jump. I'm gonna just be straight up and say I played this game for multiple hours and still have nothing more to say than I did after playing for 20 minutes. I was thinking that the more I played, the game would give me more and more material to rip apart, but honestly, this game is terrible right from the beginning and just maintains the same level of terribleness. It's mindless, slow, monotonous, ugly, frustrating, and all around just a slog to endure. And Zuko looks fucking gross. Okay, so this is a weird one. As a game, like for adults or for the older kids that collectathon platformers were targeted at, I would say this game is very not good. But when looked at through a different lens, the quality of this game becomes incredibly obvious. This is a really great kids game, and that often doesn't happen. Games aimed at young children are typically shitted out with no regard for quality and usually use a popular IP to ensure its success. However, this is not the case here. I know a lot of people have nostalgia for this game, and I can see why. You see, as an adult who never played this as a little kid, there isn't much fun to be had here, but I can see why someone who grew up with it would have a soft spot for it. I will come right out and say, first and foremost, this game has by far the worst camera of any video game I've ever played in my life. It's that bad, and it actually made me nauseous on several points during my playthrough. Coupled with that are the controls, which are complete ass, and it's only further exacerbated by the fact that if you do so much as touch one pixel of your character to a wall or object, you bounce back from recoil, and whichever baby you're playing as awkwardly grunts. Above all else, that probably has to be the most irritating thing in this entire game. If you can look past those two enormously glaring issues, though, there is definitely a lot of fun to be had here, at least for young kids at the time this game was released. I mean, I can totally see it. I liked Rugrats as a kid, and this game lets you explore the whole Pickles residence. So the main objective of the game and how you beat it is by collecting all the missing puzzle pieces from Tommy's Reptar puzzle, and then using said pieces to complete the puzzle. You go around the house, participating in various minigames and levels, and search for this game's main collectible, Reptar bars. Reptar bars are collected by either completing tasks, minigames, or just finding them laying around the house. Once you collect enough Reptar bars, you get a puzzle piece, which you then have to place in the right space, which takes no real effort. But then again, neither does the rest of the game. It's extremely easy, but once again, kids game. Once you complete the puzzle, you play one last stage as Reptar where you have to rampage your way through a city. The devs even wrote themselves into the final stage by putting a THQ building in it and adding a little part about how everyone was on their lunch break when the building got destroyed. This game is extremely short and easy, but I think it's really the perfect entry point for a really young kid to get into the collectathon genre. Couldn't keep that quality going though, because Rugrats Time Travelers for the Game Boy Color is barely a fucking game. I played every other game in this video for multiple hours, even that god-awful Avatar one, just so I could get a big enough scope of every game I was playing, except for this one. I barely lasted 30 minutes. I couldn't do it. I'm not gonna have much to say about this one, but here we go. This is what I assume is supposed to be a 2D platformer, but momentum and physics are not a thing here at all. The objective in every stage I played is collect X amount of whatever item the stage requires of you, then make your way to the exit. You can't finish the stage without the right amount of items. Problem is, there's enemies scattered literally all over the goddamn place, and when you get hurt, you don't lose health, you instead lose one of whatever item it is you need to progress. Now, this is annoying, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, except for the fact that there is absolutely no way to defend yourself. You can't attack enemies. The only thing you can do is try to somehow go around them or jump over them, but it's easier said than done because you can only really jump far enough, usually to clear the width of the enemy sprite, and the enemies are constantly moving. The levels aren't linear either. Couple that with no map and a ton of screen crunch, and you have one of the most monotonous, disorienting, and frustrating games I've played in a long time, and it doesn't at all help that the movement in this game is slow as fucking molasses. I hesitate to even call this a game. I got through about 5 stages and just could not take it anymore. I really just stopped playing and went to bed. How anyone ever thought it was okay to release this crap is perplexing. I can't believe this little 2D Game Boy Color game ended up being the game that broke me, especially when it was up against this. It just goes to show that even with bare minimum resources, clever and skilled developers can still manage to break the boundaries of just how much they can not give a shit. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, maybe check out one of the other videos I have right there on the screen. And if you want to see more, click that subscribe button and now also the bell for notifications when I release new videos, since apparently subscribing doesn't always show you that. And if you want to help me afford to feed myself, my Patreon link is right there too. Toodles.